Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new installment of GenAI Done Right. Today, our guest is Maya from Thread AI. So I've known Maya for, at this point, 15 years now? We were in the same analyst class actually a different analyst class at Goldman Sachs a decade ago. We sat next to each other and, writing Java enterprise code. I was not a very good programmer, so I stopped writing code a couple years later, and Maya stayed the course. And now she is a co-founder of Thread AI after a successful journey at New York Times and Palantir. So Maya, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and it's very nice to meet you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So maybe you can give our audience a little bit background on your journey as an engineer and now as a founder.
So yeah, like you said, my background is I've been a distributed systems engineer for 15 years. Started out my career within prime brokerage at Goldman Sachs before I transitioned to the team where you and I work together in the futures client trading space and the margining systems. So I spent the majority of my career building server-side systems and infrastructure. And then after about 4.5 years, I went to go work for the New York Times, building mostly e-commerce type software, things like product catalog, payment systems, worked a little bit on some paywall things, and then transitioned the second half of my time there to more like cloud DevOps work. And then also 4.5 years into that, so I went to go work for Palantir. At the time, I was looking to move away from the e-commerce space and be anything ML, AI, infra adjacent. 2019, it felt like the space was exciting and starting to go somewhere. So I joined as a backend IC, mostly building inference infrastructure. And then that's where I met my now co-founder, Angela. So she and I grew the team from 3 people to over 30 people, and it felt like the growing pains of a startup. And then she and I left in 2023 to start this current company, Thread AI, where we spent some time studying the market and focusing mostly on the orchestration side of things, so the operationalization of AI and embedding AI into workflows. So you can think of it as very downstream of our previous experience.
Great. We're going to dive into that, and congrats on the journey, and welcome to the dark side of being a founder. I think there's a lot more hats that you will be wearing in addition being tech lead. So I'd love to learn more about what exactly are the problems that Thread AI solve. But before that, how did you come up with the name? And also your course platform is called Lemma. How did you came up with those two names?
So yeah, the lemma, the helping theorem in math, which we like what that symbolized, which is you're basically a smaller component of a larger problem that you're trying to solve, which our main tenet is how do we build composable infrastructure? So infrastructure that people can build upon. So provide them with the building blocks that they can use to connect to existing systems to help them basically make the best use that they can of AI. So generative or non-generative, the idea is how do you build that enablement layer to help folks, whether it's connect existing data sources, legacy systems, and provide the different kinds of like guardrails or like human loop components around third-party systems, which may or may not be generative AI models, for example.
Got it. And so you mentioned the word AI orchestration, right? And that's the problem that you guys are solving. Like what is your working definition of AI orchestration, and what is broken in the status quo before Thread coming?
So we spent a fair amount of time learning from a lot of the orchestration and durability space. They're pretty solved problems, and like there's already giants in the space of folks who have created Conductor that came out of Netflix, or like Cadence that became Temporal that came out of Uber. And a lot of these tools have, like I said, solved for the problem of building workflows durably and reliably. But there's still
and maybe just quick question: Are we talking about companies that have their own data and train their own models, or it could be just company at the application layer.
So yeah, we are, you can think of us as the operationalization layer. So this is not model training infrastructure, and it's not model hosting infrastructure. So these models can exist on the customer side and third parties or any places. So we're almost like, for lack of a better word, the unsexy glue code that people shouldn't be writing or don't want to write, but you need the unsexy glue code to make the best use out of models. Usually to go from, I guess like in the case of generative models, a probabilistic machine is just going to give you a next set of characters to an actual value proposition. It takes a lot of infrastructure, which we're seeing like most verticalized companies, they shouldn't be spending that kind of time or resources when they should be solving the main business problems, which is where their IP is, but not things like building compound systems that are, and like handling the chaining or going from batch to streaming or handling retries or adding the guardrails or like adding cost functions. So these are all kind of like the glue code that is basically that we provide as like a simple layer or SDK that you can embed into your existing system.
And before companies uses Lemma, what are they using? They have homegrown code to do everything you just described?
So yeah, so like usually depending on kind of like where the customer is with their AI journey, there's usually a combination of many different tools across kind of like systems. So there's cases where folks are buying like end-to-end like verticalized solutions where they have a number of them. But then there's also cases where folks are investing a lot in building these infrastructures in-house. So they have to dedicate like a 5-person ML infrastructure team to be able to like operationalize AI safely. So there's cases where folks are much earlier on their journey. So like still earlier on the data curation journey, and they've done basically like a prototype where they've built kind of like a simple, let's say like a RAG or just like a proof of concept. But then they usually come to us when they actually need to put this in production.
Can you give us some kind of real world examples of like business use cases where a kind of more robust orchestration is needed?
So yeah, so we're seeing kind of like, since we're horizontal infrastructures, our customers are across all kinds of sectors, so like media, financial services, public safety. We've published a few public blog posts around kind of like some of the cases that we've operationalized with folks, but there's a lot of kind of like repetition around cases of automating answering to security questionnaires or automating some components of responding to RFIs and RFPs, where people are starting to invest in the data curation, but they're still seeing challenges in like doing that at scale or applying kind of like proper data filtering and routing the information to the right users or adding the right set of controls where certain people can see certain pieces of information, or adding an automated way or bringing different kinds of end users into a workflow where, for example, the workflow could be built by a technical user, but the person who is in charge of approving it could be non-technical. So how do you pause like these kinds of long-running workflows and have these different kinds of personas come in and review or edit or deny certain requests?
Is it kind of like, multiple AI agents or, tools are doing the work, but in the middle, there needs to be different gates that human needs to review, and this is the infrastructure to facilitate that.
So yeah, so basically, if you have like a long-running multi-step process, whether it's invoicing or, for example, in the hoteling sector, where you want to automate some parts of invoicing, but it still needs to go and you need the human to review the results of a model. So how do you pause that durably so that that person can come in the order of like minutes, or it can take months and resume basically that workflow? So we make it easy so that you don't have to think about these different infrastructure components of like all these different correlations or a concept of like a handoff and a way to let users pause and unpause workflows in and out of the platform.
Besides this kind of wait for human example, right? Can you give another one or two example about things that the orchestration platform does for your clients?
So yeah, so one thing we've heavily invested in, one of the product primitives is we have a concept of a functions registry, which you, in a very similar style through a lot of kind of like API integration components, you can integrate across protocols. So you can have these different models that are gRPC or REST or GraphQL. And so whenever, say, like if you want to, without any downtime, replace an OpenAI model with a DeepSeek model in your workflow. That can just be a configuration change. We don't need to know anything about it. Technical user doesn't need to know anything about it. A product decision maker can go and make that change using like the low code, no code components. So we help build kind of like the underlying building blocks and the schema compatibility so that you can make these kind of like gateway changes on the fly, for example.
Are most of your customers enterprise, or you're seeing it for companies
So
different
we
stage?
are, from the beginning, we've made it a point to break into these difficult enterprise. So we're familiar with the long life cycles. So we've prioritized a lot of kind of like the security guarantees and the deployability guarantees, because these are industries that we understand that they're much harder to break into. But once you're in, the value is you can really revolutionize some of their stacks.
And are you mostly selling to developers?
So it's so what's neat about their product is while there is like a developer APIs and SDKs, we also are investing in these low code, no code building blocks components so that product owners and other non-engineers, we're seeing kind of like an interesting pull from folks who are like mechanical engineers and other kinds of engineers, where they are very interested in these low code components. But initially, when we started, a lot of these graphs were built using code.
So two questions, because you mentioned kind of the persona you're distributing to. One is there's always the case that engineers believe I can do this better, or I don't need this solution. I can do this better. How do you sell through?
Yep. I know, I guess, like as an engineer, selling to engineers is difficult and challenging, which is why you have to prove to them that it's not worth their time building the piece of infrastructure that you are building. But to your point, there's always kind of like the engineering mindset that you have to come prepared for, where folks want to build. But we believe, obviously, engineers should focus on the main kind of like business problems and not I want to say, again, like I keep using that term, the unsexy glue code. Folks shouldn't be, because a lot of these problems are either kind of like solved, or these are not kind of like the best use of engineering time.
And another thing that we see often is, companies, because you're a horizontal solution, right? But you need your initial customers, and these are enterprise with like good leverage. You end up finding yourself building customized code, and it's like a glorified consulting project for some of your largest customers. Have you guys seen any of that tendency, and how do you avoid that?
So we've been doing a very good job at making sure where, if initially there are some surges to demonstrate kind of like a proof of value, when you are putting it in production, you're either kind of like baking it into the product so that it is a first-class primitive, or if it is completely custom, then you would throw it back to the customer where they would own it in their cloud, whether in the form of GCP function, a Lambda function, or their own model. So since we're not a services or a consultancy shop, we don't have any custom code. Everything, and since the product allows you to integrate at these broad kind of like primitives that are connectors. A connector can be anything, but the customer can build their own custom connector where they own kind of like that connector code, but you would basically like host it. You would help them kind of like host it or scale it, but using kind of like the main kind of like industry primitives. Likewise, the definition of a function is very permissive. It's an API call, can be it can be streaming, it can be batch, but using kind of like third-party call, or again on their side, if it is calling a custom function on their side, they would own that custom code. We're not in the business of building custom UI or custom software. So we have some broad primitives. For example, the idea of the context internally, which kind of like the memory logic that the worker uses, is pretty broad, and users can pass around kind of like data within kind of like these confines in a way that like lets them do these arbitrary transformations.
Do you see yourself competing with the last generation of the orchestration platform, as anywhere from Zapier to the MuleSoft and other tools out there?
We're seeing kind of like a lot of interesting places where we're coming head to head with some RPA software, where folks are starting to kind of like rethink some of the RPA model, which in some cases it works, but other cases pretty brittle. So move away from kind of like the click by click or and folks want to replace that with cases where you want to go from unstructured to structured using a model, but you still want to have some concept of like a guardrail. You don't want like a free reign agent doing whatever it is that it wants to do. Or like folks who want to apply constraints, like things like a cost constraint. So for example, if you have a production support agent, and part of that production support rotation is like doing a BigQuery lookup, you don't want to run arbitrary BigQuery because like these are very expensive. So you want to provide these like constraints where it's like if the cost of this function is higher than XYZ, actually go ping the human. It's cheaper to do it that way. So kind of like these kinds of primitives that we're seeing kind of like an interesting need for where folks are not completely comfortable kind of like having an agent do whatever it is that it wants to do.
Yeah, very, very cool. Two more questions. One, so it's been over 2 years now since kind of ChatGPT brought the attention of everybody on LLMs and AI. What has your experience been selling to enterprise? Because I think, obviously there are people who are more skeptical, there are people who are more enthusiast, but now every CEO is on the agenda, but at the same time, security and compliance still stop shows sometimes. How have your experience been on the ground?
Yeah, obviously, if you're a 1 or 2 year old startup, selling to enterprises is challenging, but which is part of the reason why our main value proposition is that you don't have to blow away your entire stack. And obviously, we can't go into these customers and be like, we have to demand that you give us access to all your data. Then you can kind of like do meaningful things. We have to invest in things like connectors or prove that things can run. We can connect things while the data sits on your side, or we can easily embed not just like at the beginning of a workflow, but in the middle or at the end. We have kind of like these insertion points, which is like a heavier emphasis maybe earlier on like things like integrations and also like different kinds of modalities of deployment and like compliances that say you would expect a startup first to focus on product market fit instead of focusing on these like security things. But these security things are what can get your foot in the door in some of these enterprises. But it is
that's what we do. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. And last question from me, Maya. So I know you're from Egypt. We both came to the States for college. How have your experience been, as now an immigrant founder? And do you see the community growing?
So yeah, I've gone through kind of like the whole alphabet soup of, I came to the US in 2006 as an undergrad on F1 visa, and then I did the OPT, and then I went through the H1B, the green card, and then finally became a naturalized citizen a couple of years ago. I didn't know that I wanted to be a founder. At heart, I've always been a builder, but I think it's been a very fortunate opportunity to be able to create something out of nothing. I think it is particularly challenging as an immigrant founder, but I think there is like a growing community and a lot of even other startups who are looking to help sponsor some of these founders. Yeah, hopefully you and I can help contribute back to that community.
For sure, one podcast episode at a time. So Maya, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Congratulations on coming out of stealth and all the success to date. And I think a lot of the problems that you mentioned are indeed things that enterprises see when they adopt AI. So best of luck, and looking forward to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Sam. Likewise.